Thank you very much.
Thank you. We first want to thank Glenn, as well as the organizing committee here, for allowing us to share our viewpoint. And this isn't just our viewpoint. We actually sought some information for other early career or newer investigators, both on campus, that were contacted by me, as well as at the LRCP by Anthony. So this is going to be sort of a summary of that, as well as a bit of our big picture. There'll be some redundancies from this morning, because I think or earlier this afternoon, I was happy to see that a lot of the main points that were made we actually came up with as well. So I'm hoping we're not too far off base or too naive in some of our hopes for the next 10 years or so. So as I mentioned, we contacted the community of cancer researchers. This is a very small group that we contacted, both on campus as well as at the LRCP. And these were early career investigators that we self-identified. And we gave them a basic questionnaire really to help guide us, and that was to ask them if they identified themselves as a clinical or basic researcher, or both, because we thought that was important for how they would answer the questions, as well as where they were located, so main campus versus LRCP or elsewhere. What were the major facilitators that they felt were contributing to the research, as well as some of the obstacles that they were feeling were preventing their research from moving forward, and then finally what they thought a cancer center could do for them.
So the campus perspective, and you can see already the bias that there's all basic scientists up at the main campus. And when we polled LRCP, there was a more variety, including 2 clinician scientists, 2 clinical researchers, as well as 4 basic science researchers. And so the first point that almost everyone cited as a major facilitator was collaborations, the collaborative nature of London's research community. And I can attest to this myself, that in my very brief 2 years here, I have collaborators both on campus as well as here, and highlighted, we just published a paper with Alison Allen, which I think is a great example of this teamwork, but there's numerous others.
Another major facilitator, and I'll add that this is also an obstacle, but we're going to focus on the facilitator right now, is of course funding. And I think universally, both at the LRCP and the basic scientists on campus said that pilot grants were a huge help. So whether these were the small grants or academic development fund type grants or Lawson grants, and even gap funding, this was cited, I think, across the board as a major facilitator for newer investigators. So I'm adding in an anecdote here. In my experience since coming to Western in 2007, I was able to start an additional component of my research program because of a small grant, so an ADF grant that was awarded to me. When I came in my postdoc, we were using human embryonic stem cell matrices and discovered that there were certain anti-cancer properties within those matrices. So I wanted to know what some of those were to basically learn new targets and find new avenues for research. The problem was at Western at that time, there was no human embryonic stem cell research whatsoever, and I really didn't have any collaborators to do this type of work with. So I applied for a grant, and I think it was $33,852. This was before I learned how to round up on my grant applications. And with that, I was able to start the first human embryonic stem cell culture at the University of Western Ontario since Vic Badia left, so to restart the embryonic stem cell culture, and then also to form a collaboration with Gilles Lajoie. So because of that seed money, Gilles and I have mentored and co-mentored 3 students together, so graduate students. We've also published 3 papers, and we have 2 more that are on the go. And I've also been able to join other groups in the stem cell community that's emerging at Western to participate in some group grant applications and to really help broaden our research. So I think that $33,800 some odd dollars has actually gone a really long way, and it's a great illustration of how just a little bit of money to a new investigator, and really to anyone, can help to encourage building a new area of research, and also, I think, facilitate teams.
So another thing that was cited as a very major strength was the multidisciplinary graduate programs, including the Cancer Research Training Program, the Translational Breast Cancer Unit training program, as well as the biomedical engineering program. And so I'll just interject a brief anecdote from one of my colleagues that described his initial experience. So he started with his lab and his startup funds with 1 student. And that student wrote a very good paper and then got funded through the CART program, which allowed another student to come on board. And between the 2 of them, with that inertia, they published a couple more papers, and this facilitated a CAHR grant. The second student got funded through this, and he's now up to 4 students. And so this cancer research training program is really a huge, huge asset to cancer researchers here in London. Another strength that was cited was the core facilities, such as our transgenic animals facility.
Another major facilitator I think we can all appreciate as we're moving through is access to highly trained personnel, and this includes graduate students and postdocs who are dedicated and also have buy-in to research, as well as medical students. I think that's probably more the case at the LRCP and less so on campus, something we can start to change, as well as research assistants and technicians.
So, mentorship and leadership of senior scientists, this was cited by many people. You know, of course there is the formal Schulich mentoring program where all new faculty should have a mentorship committee to help guide them early on. But these people are absolutely invaluable as senior scientists for starting a laboratory, and they're the people that are doing a lot of heavy lifting in terms of things like administration, writing grants that support this cancer research training program, just really critical things. And I can attest to the fact that, you know, I'm a very junior investigator, and without mentorship with people like Joe Mimrick and Jim Korpatnik and many others at LRCP, my research efforts would have likely gone nowhere, but we've had some early success thanks to them.
Okay, so I get the first obstacles, I guess, slide. And this was actually cited as a facilitator and an obstacle, depending on the context and the investigator. So one being engaged clinical collaborators, and I think this is particularly important in cancer research, where even at the independent operating grant level, we're now required to translate the work that we're doing at a basic level to consider the human condition. And for that, I think we need clinical collaborators, both to tell us what the problems actually are, but then to help us govern through or move through ethics approval, acquiring tissue, for example, and even knowing what we're looking at as basic scientists. Other facilitators and obstacles are access to tissue. So some said that that's actually very good here in London, and others said it's a difficulty, and I think some of that was actually location dependent. So LRCP versus main campus, and then also site dependent. So some cancer sites are doing better than others at this. And then statistics support and clinical research unit, and I'll have Anthony speak to that.
Oh no, well there certainly is. So people that are strictly part of the LRCP, which a lot of surgical oncologists are not, do have access to the statistical support and clinical research unit in a much greater degree, but certainly there are a lot of people that this would be a huge asset and would facilitate some of their research. So other obstacles, so we talked about funding, so the startup grants, cancer research training program grants, so certainly a huge benefit, but we could always use more and expand the scope of what we're doing for students, postdocs, pilot projects, equipment. And one that was pointed out in particular is postdocs. So the cancer research training program is really for graduate students, and we really don't have a formal way internally of helping to support these postdocs. Then other people talked about what Lynn has already alluded to, barriers to obtaining team funding. And once again, these engaged clinical collaborators, right? So not someone that just says, yeah, that sounds great, I want to be involved, but they needed people that are going to read these grants, they're going to revise them, they're going to put them in the proper clinical context, be part of meetings, and really provide that clinical input. And that's going to facilitate this rapid translation to the clinic that, you know, if you're just on the basic science side, may be really hard to see. And so this was really something that was brought up by many people. In addition, corporate partners, so these large team grants, which is really where a lot of these funding agencies are going, actually require leverage from corporate partners, and some investigators cited difficulty obtaining that corporate partnership.
Another issue or obstacle that I've faced myself is the dilemma of whether to publish or patent findings in intellectual property. And it's difficult and sometimes impossible to translate without a patent. If something is not protected, it's sometimes difficult to get corporate buy-in in order to bring something to a clinical trial, for example, or even to forward the research to the next step. And so that's something that I think as researchers we all need to consider. However, it does conflict with the training of highly qualified personnel, so our graduate students and our postdocs who want to get out there and present their work. And oftentimes it conflicts with promotion and tenure, where we're really looking at the number of publications we're putting out in many cases as a senior author. And in addition, there's little understanding for this process or help. So many of us are trained as clinicians or scientists and really do not know much about the commercialization process. We don't know what is patentable, what isn't patentable, and what's even worth pursuing. So we see this as an obstacle, particularly in people who are coming up with new intellectual property. And as another anecdote, I can move back to my doctoral studies when I was a PhD student. And the work I was doing with Dr. Charles Graham at Queen's was actually prepared for a patent. So for the first 2 or 3 years of my graduate studies, I wasn't able to publish my work. It was very hard. There was a conflict with me because I wanted to get out there and talk about what I was doing. However, in the long run, that patent eventually went through. It was licensed by a company, so it provided me even with a little money during my postdoc. That helped. But aside from that, it's actually moved to a phase 2A trial and now has been approved for a phase 3 clinical trial and has led to a startup company. So I think without finding that balance and understanding the worth of that, that wouldn't have happened. And this is sort of an obstacle and something we're facing in our research.
And so I won't belabor this, but what was kind of alluded to earlier is that the funding of the LSJP scientists is different from the people on campus, and it's not stable. And this is an obstacle because if you're trying to plan for 5 years, 10 years down the road, and you're not sure about your job security in the near future, obviously that impairs things. And these are some of the people, at least on the South Campus, that make things run. Once again, run the Cancer Research Training Program and provide mentorship for junior scientists. So this is a very important thing.
So another major obstacle, I think, that was brought up earlier in the day is actually communication, and particularly for people who are off campus and not being particularly well integrated at this point. So feeling isolated from the main cancer research community here in London, and often seeking collaborations outside of the city where there are great ones right here within the city. Also difficulty connecting with clinicians and disease-specific teams to really translate the work. So again, this is really taking the very basic research concepts and ideas and bringing it together with some of the work that's being done by the clinical folks here in London.
So what can the new Cancer Centre do for you? So these are some of the thoughts that came up, and the first set of things are kind of hard and fast things, and then the second set of things are more global. So we'll go through the more straightforward things too. So many people cited the access to tissue and blood. They found the process very challenging. You know, Lynne told me her story of trying to get access to breast tumors and melanoma, and she went to, even in the United States, other institutions within Canada, when obviously, you know, those resources are available here, and those are because of some of the barriers. So a streamlined process would be very helpful. Centralized patient databases. So some institutions have databases with staging, smoking, drinking, clinical outcomes that are entered already and are available for clinical use and not so difficult to access. And any project currently that involves that involves a ton of elbow grease to kind of recreate that work, and often those outcomes are not as robust because they're not prospectively collected. So this would be a huge use to many, many people, many researchers at the Cancer Centre. And so ethics, barriers to ethics approval was also cited, particularly for initiatives that are multi-centered or very broad, such as things like developing centralized patient databases. One of this is just getting this through ethics. It's a major barrier.
Again, funding. So funding comes up over and over again. Continuing to support the training programs. And I think as we move forward, whether or not the CART programs get renewed, but training programs in general, I'm going to let you speak to the stability of
the so we've already alluded to that. So,
as well as paying for research assistants for clinicians and state-of-the-art core facilities that have to be continually upgraded, and there's really cannot be funded off of operating grants and individual grants.
So then on to the more global picture. So from the perspective of a new investigator, what would this ideal cancer center look like? So it should be a center where discovery, development, and delivery come together with the ultimate goal of generating better treatments and or cures for cancer. It's made up of the very best scientists, clinicians, community networks, and patient groups, and recognized internationally as a leading center of excellence in cancer research and therapy.
So what could the Cancer Center do to help facilitate that for our community? And I think the main message that I got was really by improving the communication between campuses, individuals, corporate partners, and the community. So just improving our communication, and I think some of the things that get lost in communication. So things as simple as webcasting across the campuses so that we're all aware of what's going on at the different campuses and can participate in things like rounds. Encouraging membership across the university and the hospitals, and across the university we're including members of our business school as well as members of different faculties in media, for example, or even sociology, playing an active role in education. So this is really adding translational cancer research as a specialization through all of our educational streams. So in the BMSc program, a specialization in translational cancer research where we bring students through their undergraduate education with this type of research in mind. MD PhDs that have a specialization in translational cancer research where these students would be integrated both in clinical practices focused in cancer research and then also have an opportunity to be in basic science labs for their PhD components. Also partnering with the new School for Public Health. So public health is of course a great issue for cancer, so prevention as well as treatments. The next point is facilitating a major fundraising event here in London. So something like the CBCF Run for the Cure, specifically for our cancer research program here, or like the Ride for the Cure that the Campbell Centre has done so well. And I think there are a lot of people from London who go to Toronto to ride their bikes and then give money to Toronto. So something like that would be fantastic for our own community. And then finally, working with World Discoveries and other entities like that to identify opportunities for commercialization. So really talking with the clinicians and the scientists about what would be worth commercializing and then helping to facilitate that.
So we've talked about team building quite a bit and team grants, and it's really becoming clear that the greatest translational advances are made by teams of investigators. It's very, very rarely one person functioning in isolation. And so what's great about London is it really is an ideal place to set up these teams because of several reasons. And one is that collegial environment, our large clinical catchment area, and our proximity to major business centers, and a lot of high quality personnel.
We do have here, though, some difficulties in forming teams, and I think this is one thing that a cancer center or other organized centers could help facilitate. So yet another anecdote, I've been involved in a few team-type grants since being at Western, and they were great experiences for me, and moving forward I want to continue to participate in these, but we did have a number of difficulties, and I think looking at the difficulties, we can kind of try to establish what a center can help to do to facilitate this type of process in the future. So one was finding matching funds from industry, and we were really scrambling at the last minute to find these type of funds, and I think we need as a center to try to secure funds in advance and have pools of resources so that when these opportunities come up, they're there and available rather than cold calling at the last minute. The other is filling in the gaps. So on any major team initiative, there's a requirement for, of course, clinical people in order to translate the information, the basic scientists, but then also very critical individuals in the area of biostatistics, for example, bioinformatics, and the list goes on and on and on. So having a repository of individuals that are working together all the time, not the 4 weeks before the grant is due, but rather, for a long period of time, I think would help. Allowing for more depth of the team so that it isn't all new investigators or all more senior investigators, and really allow those people to work together. I think it's important to have very solid senior individuals heading up team grants. They can make connections. They also know how things go. And finally, a lack of resources. So this is as basic as providing funding for team or project managers to help to organize all of this. So you're organizing 10, 15, 20 researchers who are all very, very busy. And so having somebody who can facilitate that would be, I think, of an extraordinary benefit.
So strategic recruitment. So this is one thing that came up, is that recruiting at all levels should really be to fill in the gaps that Lynne alluded to in expertise and or enhance ongoing research. And also that collaborating with basic and clinical departments so that recruitments are in alignment with current research platforms, and recruiting new investigators that fit well and or complementing existing teams. And so my boss is here, so it's a good time to kiss up. So when I was hired, you know, I met with the dean, I met with Dr. Bauman, I met with the medical oncologists, I met with Dr. Koropatnik in the lab, I met with all the scientists in the LRCP, as well as lots of clinical people. And so I kind of assumed that that's kind of how this happened, but I've come to learn that that's not the case. And I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation that anyone that is a clinician that has anything to do with cancer meets with someone from the basic science side or meets with a translational group, and as part of their academic deliverables has to contribute something to those group. And conversely, if there's someone that identifies someone as a cancer researcher coming to Western, they should have to meet with some clinical team and align themselves. And I think that that would be a huge step forward, that if having that as part of your academic deliverable, being part of that translational effort will really be a step forward.
Okay, so I guess this is our vision. So 2020 vision, it would be more 2021 in 10 years, but I like 2020. So we would think that the Center for Translational Cancer Research in London will be recognized internationally as a center of excellence for cancer research, particularly in a few niche areas that hopefully will be discovered and pointed to within the next few years. You want me to do the rest? Okay. The other is that cancer research will be a signature area, not only for the Schulich School of Medicine and Dentistry, but also for the entire university. So including partners at the business school, as well as other faculties, engineering and science, as I've mentioned. The list really can go on and on. That researchers will feel engaged and committed to the center regardless of location or discipline, so that membership will really be virtual and will be a vessel to help bring different types of investigators into really solid teams. So again, bringing in investigators and new recruits at all levels, so superstars, bring them in and help them really form these teams and build them. And that finally there will be numerous, so even 2 or 3 highly funded team initiatives headed by world-renowned leaders in the field. And that, of course, we're hoping will lead to more therapeutic advances and major therapeutic advances coming right here from London.
Thank you very much.